Hello and welcome to Thinking Aloud from WPNC and Go Donate, the podcast where we get together and share our thoughts about fundraising, advertising, and more. We're here to help charities find new donors, keep existing ones, and make the donation process easier than ever. If you like what you hear, we'd love to chat. All our details are in the bio.
Hello, and welcome to the Go Donate episode of Thinking Aloud. Normally, we cover lots of exciting topics like digital fundraising and how to maximise online donations, but today's episode is just as important. It's all about online security and compliance. And if you're involved in processing online donations, which I'm sure many of you are, you need to be aware of the latest changes in PCI-DSS, which is the payment card industry data security standard. New version 4 has a key deadline approaching of the 1st of April. So understanding these changes is crucial to ensure compliance and avoid penalties and, most importantly, protect the data. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Vicky. I'm the Managing Director of Go Donate. And today I'm delighted to be joining me is Paul Brennicker from 3B Data Security, the experts in all this PCI compliance stuff and who we work with. So welcome, Paul.
Hi, Vicky. Thanks very much for inviting me along. Look forward to going through this session with you.
No worries. First of all, for those unfamiliar with PCI, I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to PCI-DSS. It's a global security standard designed to protect payment card data. It was created actually quite a while ago, about 20 years ago. And the whole point of it is to have some standards in place at a global level that everybody adheres to. So ultimately, we're making sure about reducing the amount of card payment fraud. And it's obviously been evolving quite a lot over the last few years because fraud and cybercrime have become a lot more sophisticated. So these standards are having to be changed to improve as part of that as well. PCI-DSS applies to anyone handling card payments, so this includes you as charities. Whether you use Stripe or WorldPay or other providers or you outsource it, compliance isn't just for payment processors like us, it's also for you. You still have responsibilities. And I often hear charities say to us, oh, but we use Stripe or WorldPay on our site, so we don't have to worry about anything to do with PCI. But that's not true. You're still responsible. And even if you outsource everything to companies like us, like GoDonate, that does mean you don't have to worry about a lot of the majority requirements, but these ones that we're talking about today are something that you do actually have to manage yourself, and ultimately you're still overall responsible. So today we're focusing on scripts particularly. There's two key areas that PCI version 4 is bringing in these new requirements by 1st of April. It's around script management and enhanced monitoring and reporting. And of course, when I'm talking about scripts, I'm also talking about the scripts that you put into Google Tag Manager or GTM. So, Paul, let's start with the big one, scripts. So tell us about what they are and why PCI DSS regulations are cracking down on them.
So it's been an interesting question because basically the area where we've seen the most number of compromises through e-commerce websites over the last few years, and it's all due to script-based attacks. Ultimately, there's two types of scripts. There's the ones that are actually used on the web pages themselves to construct things. And there's also scripts that we use for things like analytics and promotion, cookies, etc. Scripts are basically bits of code that are embedded in the web page and provide various functions. Advertising, sometimes they're security-based as well. You'll find them in tools like Google Tag Manager, and we're obviously using things like Hotjar, Facebook Pixel, things like that. And as I mentioned earlier, cookies too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And why is the whole scripting area become a key focus within the PCI standards?
What they've been trying to do at the PCI level is basically cut out the most common areas of card fraud. And this is, without a doubt, the most common area of vulnerability that we see in any of the e-commerce sites. So you might have seen some of these really large data breaches have happened with large e-commerce providers, and 99% of the time it's script-based. So the problem is, over time, Google Tag Manager can become cluttered and full of scripts that aren't being used and out-of-date ones. And with many people in the business adding scripts on, because there's a new campaign running or something else that they want to capture some oversight of, it basically becomes a bit of an unmanaged mess. And having that unmanaged mess creates security risks, because what hackers can be looking out for is any vulnerabilities in those scripts. And as you've seen, as I mentioned, things like the British Airways and Ticketmaster. And I saw another one actually reported this week with Casio. It's another one that's literally was in the news yesterday.
Wow.
All to do with script-based attacks. You may also have heard of the Mage Cart attack, which is specifically aimed at people that are using Magento as their CMS. It's a type of cyber attack that targets e-commerce sites, injects malicious code into any pages where personal data is going to be collected or entered into forms. So obviously what they're really looking at is for checkout pages, or in charities terms, sort of donation pages where anybody's looking to donate any cash over. So what bad actors are in there trying to skim card details. There's a term of e-skimming that you may have heard. And that's where they're actually harvesting card details and the personal data to go with it. So we'll be looking for card number, expiry date, CVV data, name, address, email, that sort of thing. If they've got that, that's great. They've got the keys to the kingdom. They can go off and try and do a little bit of shopping, or ultimately sell your details on the dark web, which is usually what happens. So it's kind of like form hijacking, really. You think you're entering your data onto a safe site. In actual fact, there's a little bit of script sitting at the background there that's either harvesting it, skimming it, or actually, you've been misdirected and you're actually entering data somewhere where you're not aware.
Go Donate, obviously, we've got lots of processes in place to make sure that we are constantly on the case with security and managing our own scripts. But of course, within Google Tag Manager, like you said, a lot of it can be largely unmanaged, and many charities will have different people have access to it. They might have freelancers, they might have web developers and so on. So I can imagine they do get a bit messy. I can see why this is the biggest vulnerability that PCI standards want to crack down on. Tell us about these new requirements for script management, because this is really the crux of it that charities need to get their head around, because obviously they generally will have Google Tag Manager in place.
Nowadays, PCI, as you mentioned, Vicky, it's been around for a little while now. It started off in 2005, and I'm kind of old enough, sadly, to remember it. But when it did start, it was very much about technical controls to meet vulnerabilities and help manage things. Now it's sort of getting into its middle age. It's sort of getting more and more about procedures and doing the right thing. And actually, the tools have been proven over the years to be the right thing to do. Now it's actually about making sure that you manage things correctly. This whole, as I talked about, the unmanaged mess of many, many scripts on people's websites that could have been there for a long, long time. It's all about getting a grip of that and managing that properly. And a lot of the time, they've been deployed by perhaps people that have even left the business, or people with little technical know-how. And it's just a case of getting to grips with that, working out actually what's required on the site, and making sure that only the scripts that are there to make the site run and collect current analytic data that are the ones that are active on the site. Generally speaking, you see something between 20 or 50 scripts running on a site, not uncommon within Google Tag Manager. We've done some analytics with some of our clients over the years, and we found one in the summer of last year that had got over 350 scripts running just on one checkout page.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, most of those scripts were not required or even being used anymore. They just hadn't been tidied up, basically.
Yeah. So what do charities need to do then if they've got Google Tag Manager in place?
So first thing you need to know is what all your scripts are doing. Because as I say, there's a lot of sites that have just got redundant scripts that are sitting out there on the site and are running, but not actually, they're serving no purpose. Nobody's actually interacting with them. So first thing, make sure that all the scripts that you have running are correct. The best way of doing that is to have a look at what's running. Really, you need to create some sort of inventory of all the scripts that are on the site. Then you can go through them and work out the ones that you actually currently require. Once you've got your inventory and you've gone through the list and you can see, yes, tick, these are the ones that we need. And here's a whole bunch of scripts that actually are well out of date and we're not using that campaign anymore. We can get rid of them. So ultimately, it'll also make the site run a little bit better. One of the ways to manage that is via change control. And that's a system that we sort of advocate when we're doing PCI assessments. We'll just stop things from getting implemented without the proper authorization. So when something wants to go onto a website, a simple request, it can be as simple as a spreadsheet in an email. You don't need a massively complicated change control system to run that. Just as long as it's documented why it's being implemented, for what purpose, and who's asking for it, and actually what the script is. And then you can have a process to say, yep, that's authorized. We'll put that on the site. We'll enter it into our change log. If somebody wants to come along in 6 months and have a look at it, we can see who requested it, why, and if it's just for a short-term campaign, actually how long it needs to be there, and we can get rid of it. So it's all about managing that. We've got the first three parts. We've got the inventory, we've got the change control bit, and we've got the authorization part. The last bit is to check the integrity of the script. Because what we also see occasionally happening in this area is that scripts will be corrupted and deliberately corrupted by bad actors. The script is still doing the purpose that you have deployed it for, but it's also doing some e-skimming as well. So some of the scripts are potentially being subverted. And if that's the case, how are you ever going to find that? Just by looking at the scripts and saying, yeah, that's one that we authorized a while ago, but now it's been subverted. So what you really need is some sort of integrity check on that script to make sure that the script that you deployed is the script that's still being used and is still sort of valid on the site. So once you've got those 4 things in place, kind of ties all those requirements together. And that's the new thing that's gone into PCI for e-commerce sites.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really, really helpful, Paul. So really important that you follow those 4 key areas there. For those of you that are with GoDonate, for GoDonate clients listening in, if you don't want to have this responsibility going forward, we can offer an alternative of us managing your scripts for you. If you want to go down that route, that's not a problem. You still need to do that first part you still need to do that audit to see what scripts you've got in place and do the business justification for each of them. But at that point onwards, you can then ask us to manage those scripts for you, so you don't have to worry about the ongoing integrity management side of things. And change control would be managed through us. So that's an option out there. But if not, make sure you do those other things. So there's a second key requirement within the PCI version 4, which is around enhanced monitoring and reporting. So Paul, can you just explain a bit more about this one, please?
Yeah, sure. So this part is part of requirement 11. The one about script monitoring is more about web development and sort of deployment. So that sits in requirement 6. Mm-hmm. Following on from the issues that we've got with the scripts, and making sure that we understand what the scripts are and making an inventory and looking at the change control process. This part is actually part of that change detection bit to make sure that the scripts are being modified without anybody's consent. So what we're looking at is it's a tool to look at the website that is tied into making donations or accepting customer data. And obviously that's important not only from a PCI perspective, but it's also quite important from a GDPR perspective. You don't need to be using customer data. And obviously with charities, you're collecting quite a lot of that data with regards to gift aid and things like that. So any of that personally identifiable information, it's one of those things. We just need to make sure that we're checking that and the validity of the code that is used to harvest that data is being managed and making sure basically that it's not being changed in any way. So the requirement ensures that any changes to the payment pages that you have are authorized. The tool that you've deployed to check that the payment pages are still as they were when you left them, it flags an alert up if anything changes to say the nature of the way that the page is being created or the data on the page has changed. You can go in and have a look at it and say, actually, yes, that does relate to the change control that we put in yesterday. The web developers have put a change in onto the page today. I can tick that off and say that's a valid change. And obviously, if it isn't, you can then go in and do some monitoring and check actually exactly what has happened. And that very early warning system is really what the PCI sort of standard is trying to address, getting these issues pretty much identified almost as soon as they happen. The requirement is to do an integrity check of the site once every 7 days. So obviously the longest period of exposure would be just under 7 days if you had an incident and something was dropped onto the site. So that's obviously what we're looking at. It is to check that and make sure that any changes on the site are authorized and the ones that we're aware of.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And just to be clear for those listening, that's different to the script integrity monitoring we were talking about just now. This is actually about looking at the HTTP headers and so on the website. So for GoDonate clients, the good news is we manage this bit for you. So we would be doing all that change in tamper detection solution we have in place for you, so you don't have to worry about that. If you're using another provider for your online donations, or indeed you've got your digital agency doing it for you and you're just integrating, using an iframe or something, please do contact them and make sure that they have got this in place. So you need to ask them, have they got a change in tamper detection solution in place to handle this requirement number 11. That's really great. Thank you, Paul. So I'm just going to finish off. We've done a few of these sessions now, Paul and I, with a number of charities, and there's been a few questions that have come out of those. And I really wanted to just share a couple of those questions and answers because there was a few key ones that came out. So the first one that we got asked quite a lot was, using an iframe on your site mitigate any of these concerns?
So iframes, unfortunately, don't eliminate the need to monitor for compliance. So even if you're embedding payment forms and you've got a particularly sort of constructed site and other forms just pop up within an iframe, yep, it still needs to be monitored. That's popular misconception, that one.
Yeah, I bet. And another question we did get asked quite a lot was, so we've obviously talked a lot about online donation pages. This also would include, when we talk about payment pages, we're talking about if you've got an online shop where you're doing raffle or lottery, things like that, where you're taking payments. But do these requirements, we get asked, apply to other website pages as well, like across the website, or is it only payment pages?
As far as PCI is concerned, it's only on the payment pages. It's the pages where the card details are going to be captured. But obviously, from a best practice point of view, any pages that you have that's harvesting or collecting sort of customer data, it's good to deploy on those pages.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. We mentioned about various sort of integrity monitoring tools and so on. Is there a list of tools out there that can help with all this monitoring that some charities need out to do?
We certainly maintain a list, and we're looking at a few different providers as we speak. It's early days, obviously, with the PCI standard. We're just getting around to actually reviewing some of them in earnest to meet some of the PCI requirements. So as a QSA company, we're updating a list ourselves internally. But obviously, if you just do a search for PCI script management, you'll definitely find some things that crop up in Google. And AWS as a hosting environment has actually got some things in the AWS marketplace that are specifically aimed at meeting these requirements already. As you can imagine, there's a few developers that have jumped on the bandwagon and have provided some tools immediately to do this. So, but if you need to know any more, we're also happy to share our list if you need to reach out to us.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. And obviously, Google Tag Manager is a key area that charities are managing and so on. If one of the tags within Google has been changed, within GTM, will it flag? Will it sort of tell you that it's been changed?
Yeah, it will do. Yeah, the file integrity monitoring solution will pop up an alert that the integrity of the script's changed. So it might be that you get alerts crop up quite regularly to say a script has changed. And if that's the case, check it and say that's an authorized change, tick it off. It's just about that process to make sure that it is being looked at and it's being managed.
Great. And finally, a common question we had is for those GoDonate clients listening on the podcast, they asked if we did move over their scripts from GTM over to us to manage it at GoDonate, then would we lose any tracking or anything like that? And the answer is no, it all remains exactly as it is. It's just that we then manage those scripts for you so that we can then do all that integrity monitoring and so on. Hopefully that was useful. Just to wrap up, it's really important to remind you that the key thing is go off, please, and start reviewing your scripts and having a look at your GTM and make sure that obviously going forward that you're compliant and, do speak to your platform provider or agency about the monitoring and other things is there. And Paul, at 3B Data Security, you guys are happy to help as well, aren't you, if there's any questions that charities have?
Yeah, we certainly are. If you need to speak to one of the UK-based QSA companies, we're UK based and we have a team of QSAs all over the country. We can talk you through your compliance journey. If you need any external assistance, it's what we do as our bread and butter. So we like to think that we do quite a good job at it. Can I just add as well, Vicky, that I like to say pretty much every PCI presentation that I give, the one thing that I always say is that you can outsource everything you like apart from your responsibility to manage it properly. And we do find that quite a lot. We see an awful lot of e-commerce websites that have said, well, I've outsourced it to a payment service provider. They're collecting my payments and I'm hosting with a PCI compliant web host. Well, that's great. You've ticked 2 or 3 parts of the jigsaw, but there's still one piece missing. And that's how do you manage it? So that's one of the things that you do need to be wary of. Make sure that when you're doing your management, you do your due diligence process where you're onboarding new suppliers as well. And it's a key part in requirement 12. It's the one thing that you can't outsource to somebody else. You have to manage it properly yourself.
Brilliant. That's a really, really good point to end on, Paul. Thank you so much. So thanks very much to Paul and to you guys listening. Hope that was really useful and feel free to reach out if you do have any questions. But otherwise, good luck with your compliance in the future.
Yeah, good luck, everyone. You know where we are if you need us. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found that useful. To hear upcoming Thinking Aloud podcasts, subscribe now. And if you think we could help you, get in touch. Our details are in the bio.